Well, I want to start this story, my latest story, this God story, with a story. And it happens to be a true story. It took place midnight 1931 in Oxford. And these two men were walking next to the college there in a park. And one of them was a theist, was a lifelong atheist, but just recently became a theist / materialist. The other was a Christian, and they had met a number of times with other people in Oxford and talked about, religion, books, philosophy, and they discussed the latest ideas of the day. Well, so the theist tells the Christian, he says, the gospel stories are really interesting, but they're just myths. It's just a myth, like any other myth, but they have a good point. The Christian surprisingly agreed with the non-Christian and said, you're right, it is a myth. It's the story that all stories point to. It's the grand story. And this one myth happens to be true. The Christian in the story was named J.R.R. Tolkien, and he went on to write The Lord of the Rings, of course. And the non-Christian later on said that walk helped mark his life, and he became a Christian, and his name was C.S. Lewis, probably the greatest theologian of the 20th century, and also wrote a number of books, including The Chronicles of Narnia, i.e. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. My story begins with a simple word. And what I heard one time when I was just sitting about a year ago was the Holy Spirit clearly speak to me a riddle, actually just a word, but it turned out to be kind of a clue, if you will. And the word was Heath. I had heard the word before. I did not know what it meant, but I heard it clearly enough that I definitely felt like it was from God. So I looked up the word, and I think that's part of the point of so much of what I hear from God is like, it's kind of an adventure. It's a mystery, and he invites me into a place where I'm kind of swept away with trying to understand the clues that he's giving me in order to fulfill a mission or to bring healing or life, whatever it is. Anyway, I look up the word Heath, and it says an open, uncultivated field in Britain. So I thought that was interesting, but that's about all I had at that point. But it was distinct enough that I actually continued to listen and try to press into it. In fact, I drove to a field near my house and brought my Bible and just sat there and asked God what he was trying to say, but that was it at the time. About a month later, something happened with my work where there was a big, huge tax bill, and I was held responsible for it, even though it was not my mistake. And there was a period of time when I was trying to figure it out, and ultimately it came down to a meeting with some of my partners. And one of my friends who was a partner actually kind of betrayed my trust and kind of blindsided me in front of everyone else. And in the end, all the partners voted against me with this big bill. Point being, it was a very it was kind of a traumatic event for me at the time. And so right after it happened, directly to the moment after it happened, I went upstairs and I was like, God, I really thought you were going to come through here, and you didn't. And why not? Pretty much as soon as I finished the thought, I heard two words this time: rim wold. Wold, I did not even know if that was a word. Rim, that's pretty obvious. We all use that word, outer surface of something, right? Wold. So I look it up and my jaw hits the floor because the word means open, uncultivated field in Britain. So now I know like 100%, okay, this is not me. I'm hearing God here. I don't know what he's trying to tell me, but I'm listening, right? Time goes on. About a month later, I hear him say, Worcester College. Worcester College. Now that one I think I might have heard of before, but I couldn't have told you if it was in like Belgium, Georgia, I have no idea. But I look it up, and interesting enough, it's in Oxford, the place of stories. Oxford is like the epicenter, I would say, of literature. I didn't know much about it, never had been there, had no interest in it, but I noticed that Worcester College was in Oxford. Now I'm going to be looking at some pictures next to me to kind of reflect on what I saw at the time. But when I pulled it up, I saw that it was at the southern border of a neighborhood in Oxford called Jericho. And if you have seen my earlier testimony, I had a life-changing event by the Holy Spirit where he brought me to a place called Jericho in Arkansas. And so it definitely, this whole event changed my family, changed my life, blessed me so much. So, when I see Jericho, I'm obviously paying attention. And then I see that it's in the shape of an arrow, like the neighborhood, just the border of it. And it's pointing to a field, which is very interesting. It's Port Meadow. So I now am Googling Port Meadow, and the first thing Wikipedia says about Port Meadow is that it's an ancient area of grazing land and has never been cultivated. In fact, it says they have records all the way over 1,000 years ago where the land was given to the freemen of Oxford by Alfred the Great. And so they know for a fact this land has never been touched, never been cultivated. It's an open, uncultivated field in Britain. And because of that, it's got all sorts of historical relevance and archaeological and scientific importance because it's never been cultivated. So there I see my field, and I started to read up more about it. Another little interesting story about the field was that in 1133, there was a nun who was on the northern border of the field, God's Toe, which means place of God. And she gets a vision, and God says to her, where I shine light, I want you to build a nunnery. And so he shines it right in God's toe, and she builds this nunnery, and that lasts for a long time. And now the ruins are there, and lots of people go and visit it. It's still there today. Well, so another interesting story that I read is that there's a man named Charles Dodson who is rowing up the river next to Port Meadow with a friend and 3 girls, his other friend's daughters. And to keep him entertained, he starts making up a story. And he's rowing up to have a picnic at Godstow. But right when he gets next to Port Meadow, he says it's like an hour of God strikes the land, a golden hour. And he tells a story to this girl named Alice about her running through the land and going into a rabbit hole. And of course, his name actually later on pen name is Lewis Carroll, and he writes Alice in Wonderland. But that's just a kid's story, right? So that's got nothing to do with me. Or does it? Let's see here. One of the verses that I find very interesting is the verse where Jesus says, God, I thank you that you kept this from the wise and learned and gave it to little children. and he's talking about the kingdom of God. All right, so what happens next? Okay. So now I'm continuing to get words occasionally. I'll get these interesting English words. Gentry was another one. And I would look them up, landed estates. I would look them up, and what's interesting is if in Wikipedia, when you look up a word, it gives you a definition from the Oxford Dictionary. Well, just so happens that the Oxford University Press is one of the biggest publishers in the world, and they print the Oxford Dictionary, and it happens to be in Jericho. So I'm getting these clues. I know that something's going on here, and then my story starts to intertwine with actual stories. A friend of mine comes over and says that she's read this book called Once Upon a Wardrobe. And in this story, she says this girl goes to Oxford. And so I start reading the book, but right before I start reading the book, I get a riddle from God, and this is a full-on sentence, like full-on. Even the way it was phrased was just riddle-like, right? And the riddle is this: but beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. I get a full-on sentence this time, and it was so cryptic, but I could tell, like, yeah, this is a riddle. And I'm gonna repeat it again because it's almost hard to understand what it's actually saying. It says, but beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. Okay, so that's gonna come back later. But because of the book, and what's interesting is even on the heading here, it says, it is impossible not to be swept away by Paddy Callahan's exploration of what lies beneath C.S. Lewis's beloved land of Narnia. So it's, again, what lies beneath is the point. And this book is about this girl in Narnia and C.S. Lewis. It's not a true story, but there's a lot of actual events that happen in C.S. Lewis's life. And in this story, there's this girl who goes to Oxford, and she has a brother who she comes home to during a break. And this is in 1955 or whatever year that The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe was written. And she comes home, her brother's hiding in a wardrobe, and he's just been enchanted by the book, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And he asks her to do him a favor. Now, he's sick, and so she cares for her brother, even though she kind of finds this request a little bit silly. So let me read a portion of this. I need you to do something for me. Anything. I drop into the hard wooden chair next to his bed. Have you ever seen him? He asks. Seen who? The man who wrote about Narnia. The man who wrote the book. C.S. Lewis. Yes, I do see him quite often. He walks quickly with his pipe and his walking stick along High Street and Parks Road, as if he's always late for something. I need you to ask him a question. George, I don't really know him. I've just seen him about. He teaches at Magdalen, and they don't allow women students there. I'm at Somerville. They're a mile in worlds apart. It's the same. It's Oxford University. I can't argue that point. What do you want me to ask him? Where did Narnia come from? I don't understand. Have you read it? He asks, as if his question is the answer. I shake my head. It's a book for children. I'm consumed with physics and the way numbers hold together the universe. I'm learning about Einstein's theories, and I haven't had time to read some children's book. You're rarely wrong, sister, but you are now. It's not a children's book. It might look like it on the cover, but it's a book for everyone. Please, Megs, I need to know if Narnia is real. Of course it's not real. It's a story. like Squirrel Nutkin and that book you like about the girl who dropped into a hole in the ground. Alice, he says, this is different. I know you think the whole world's held together by some math formula, but I thought about this a lot, and I think the world is held together by stories, not all of those equations you stare at. So the point of this book is, and I heard the author talk later, it's a question about where do stories come from? Where does Narnia come from? Where does imagination come from? And is it just kids' stories, or is there something greater going on? Well, Megs in this story starts to read The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then she meets C.S. Lewis, and she asks him where the stories come from, and he never answers the question. Ironically, he just tells her more stories. But what she learns is, like, she gets swept away in Narnia and in the wonder of it all. And her story starts to intertwine with that story. And she begins to realize that Narnia might just be real after all. So I read the book, and it was very interesting. And so the next thing I, of course, had to do at that point, and I continue to get clues, but the next thing I have to do at that point is start reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Chronicles of Narnia. And I had read them in college. Like, I read just actually The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was like 30 years ago, but I had never read any of the other ones. So I start reading out of order, actually. I ask a friend which one I should read first, because it's his favorite, and it's The Silver Chair. What's interesting in this one is Aslan tells them essentially that they're supposed to go below Narnia. And remember, the riddle again is, but beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. So something beneath Narnia is of the utmost importance. And really, it's a prince who has forgotten that he actually is a prince. And he's been seduced by a queen, a witch. And she essentially has made him forget his identity. So there's a couple kids, and they're tasked to go under Narnia and find him. And they eventually find him. But then they also begin to get seduced by the witch. And what's interesting is she doesn't try to seduce them with sin. She tries to make them believe that Narnia is all just made up and that Aslan never existed. And so I'm going to read a portion of this here because I think it's very interesting. Okay. Flip a page here. She says, "Come, all of you, put away these childish tricks. I have work for all of you in the real world. There is no Narnia, no overworld, no sky, no sun, no Aslan. And now to bed all, and let us begin a wiser life tomorrow. But first to bed, to sleep, deep sleep, soft pillows, sleep without foolish dreams." I think a lot of what the enemy tries to do in our lives is to get us to be practical, to not believe in wonder. One of the characters calls her out eventually, finally kind of gets this moment of clarity and says some very interesting responses. He says, "I won't deny any of what you said, but there's one more thing to be said, even so. Suppose we have only dreamed or made up all those things, trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that in that case, the made up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. He realizes that a life without wonder, where there's just material, where it's just logic, where it's just matter, has no purpose, no meaning, just a dark place. So even if he's wrong, it's better to live in wonder, to live in kid stories. About this time, a friend of mine says, like, okay, you've got this word rim, you've got facade, which is like the outer surface of a building. Rim is like a circular structure. You should like Google, when you look at Oxford, just kind of Google, ask or look around the town, see if there's any circular buildings. And so I do. And I quickly come up with this building here. I'm gonna put a picture up. It's called the Radcliffe Camera, part of the Bodleian Library. And it happens to be probably the most iconic structure in Oxford, probably the most beautiful building, beautiful facade. And it's probably also the most famous library in the entire world. Rim, facade. And the clue, the riddle again, is what lies beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. So I'm gonna do a quick check, of course, like, does anything exist under this building? Turns out it does. It's a system of tunnels. And in these tunnels, they transport the books from one library to the next. And I think the point is clear from the riddle. It's not the beautiful facade of the building that's magical, or it is maybe yesterday's magic, but there's something underneath the building that's much more important, much more great, much more magical. And that's the stories that are being transported back and forth underneath the town of Oxford, the epicenter of story. And I'm starting to get the point that God is talking about here. He's like inviting me in to realize that all stories are a shadow of his story. And here's the crazy part, like Meg's, I get to enter into the story, and I get to be a character in the story. And it's like I'm reading my own story page by page as he starts to unveil, and I don't know what chapter is going to happen next. All right. I think that is it before, oh, no, sorry. There's one more big part of the puzzle here. And it's this one. Okay. This is I finally get to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this is one of the top 10 best-selling books of all time. Maybe up there with Alice in Wonderland as far as any kid book in history. And I'm just reading through this thing, and God is speaking to me through all the Narnia books. I mean, they are just incredibly well written. And they're kid stories, but they're so profound. But anyway, so I'm reading the epicenter of his books, and I get to the epicenter of this book, the climax, and my jaw kind of hits the floor because I read the title of the chapter, Deeper Magic from Before the Dawn of Time. Deeper Magic from Beyond the Dawn of Time. And the riddle had still been like in the back of my mind, but beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. It's deeper. It's timeless. Deeper magic from from before the dawn of time. And in the story, Aslan has to pay the price for one of the kids sins. He basically betrays Aslan, betrays his family, and Aslan is now going to be held responsible. And so it starts with a scene where the witch starts calling him out, his obligation to pay the debt. I'm going to read a section of that here. "Fool," said the witch with a savage smile. "Do you really think your master can rob me of my rights by mere force? He knows the deep magic better than that. He knows that unless I have blood, as the law says, all Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water." "It is very true," said Aslan. "I do not deny it." "Oh, Aslan," whispered Susan in the lion's ear. You won't, will you? Can't we do something about the deep magic? Isn't there something you can work against it?" "Work against the Emperor's magic?" said Aslan, turning to her with something like a frown on his face. And nobody ever made that suggestion to him again. So there's a deep magic that Aslan the lion has to obey here, and that he has to pay for the sin. Well, of course, this is an allegory to the gospel, where Jesus pays for the sin of all humanity. And again, my jaw hits the floor when I read later about the deeper magic from beyond or before the dawn of time. And I'm going to read that section. "Who's done it?" cried Susan. "What does it mean? Is it more magic?" They find the stone table where Aslan had died broken. "Yes," said a great voice behind their backs. "It is more magic." They looked around. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, stood Aslan himself. "Oh, Aslan," cried both the children, staring up at him, almost as much frightened as they were glad. "Aren't you dead then, dear Aslan?" said Lucy. "Not now," said Aslan. "Do I look it?" "Oh, you're real, oh Aslan," cried Lucy, and both girls flung themselves upon him and covered him with kisses. "But what does it all mean?" asked Susan, when they were somewhat calmer. "It means," said Aslan, "that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a deep magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and darkness before time dawned, she would have read there's a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backward." Translation: beneath the facade of yesterday's magic lies something even greater. And because of what Aslan did, because of what Jesus has done, death itself is now unwinding. And that's the good news of this story. But of course, I've got to go to Oxford, and I've got to see this field. And so that will be part 2 that I'm going to record next.